Upon taking power in the Russian Revolution, Vladimir Lenin believed that the key policy of his government must be to withdraw from the First World War by establishing an armistice with the Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary. He believed that the ongoing war would create resentment among the war-weary Russian troops to whom he had promised peace, and that these troops, as well as the advancing German army, both threatened his own government and the cause of international socialism. However, both he and Trotsky initially subscribed to an idea of no war, no peace. By contrast, other Bolsheviks such as Nikolai Bukharin and the left communists believed that the peace with the Central Powers would be a betrayal of international socialism and that Russia should instead wage a war of revolutionary defense that would provoke an uprising in Germany against their own government. Some Bolsheviks wanted to drag on negotiations for as long as possible so that the revolution could break out all over Europe. Germany insisted on keeping their wartime gains, and the Bolsheviks weren't overly happy with this at all. But in January and again in February, Lenin urged the Bolsheviks to accept Germany's proposals, arguing that the territorial losses were acceptable if it ensured the survival of the Bolshevik-led government. The majority of the Bolsheviks, however, rejected this position, hoping to prolong the armistice and call Germany's bluff. However, on February 18th, the German army launched Operation Faustschlag, advancing further into Russian-controlled territory and conquering Dvinsk within a day. So Germany was being able to beat the living crap out of the Soviets, and at this point they all started to sweat nervously. At this point, Lenin finally convinced a small number of the Bolshevik Central Committee to accept the Central Powers' demands. On February 23rd, the Central Powers issued a new ultimatum. Russia had to recognize German control not only of Poland and the Baltic states, but now also Ukraine, or face a full-scale invasion. At this point, the Bolsheviks went signing away for peace, but what if in an alternate timeline the Bolsheviks decided to wage war Bukharin's way for revolutionary defense? This then brings me to Operation Abion, where the Germans launched a very successful amphibious landing in Estonia in October of 1917, and then a land invasion in February 1918 to apply pressure on the Bolsheviks to sign the treaty to drop out of the war. Germany also planned on marching on Petrograd as well due to Bolshevik stalling. In this alternate timeline, that'll be exactly what happens. Germany obviously pushes harder in the east to try to force a Bolshevik withdrawal from the war. The march on Petrograd will be stalled as Germany offers a final chance for the Bolsheviks to surrender, and they are still going to hold out as they are wanting to wage their failed war of defense against the Germans. Meanwhile, Germany will start to set up their own governments in these occupied lands, and the Bolsheviks aren't going to get any of this land back anytime soon with their war of defense. The Bolsheviks will be seen as an even less legitimate force in Russia as they did not deliver on their promise to withdraw from World War I and give the people peace. The Bolsheviks already had little real legitimacy outside of Bolshevik circles, and after the October Revolution even, the Bolsheviks pretty much only rose to power because nobody was willing to fight them. The Mensheviks, anti-Bolshevik socialists, and non-communist groups in Petrograd had been strongly against the Bolsheviks and even held more seats in the Petrograd Soviet than them, yet they were still overthrown. Many people only viewed the Bolsheviks favorably for giving peace, and giving up that would turn the people even further against the Bolsheviks and more towards even more radical ideologies in this alternate timeline, as they start seeing the Bolsheviks as potentially similar to the Tsar. You see, the idea of a war of defense is still being at war with Germany, just so that more revolutions in Europe might spawn. And that idea was pretty unpopular among the Russian people who just wanted out of the war. So the Bolsheviks will be facing a larger popular counter-revolution as the Russian army is now going to go full rage mode on the Bolshevik government. This counter-revolution likely sees an alliance of convenience of all opposition parties as well as independence movements against the Bolsheviks, even though a lot of them have conflicting ideas on how to run Russia after the Bolsheviks are gone. The Russian people are very disillusioned at this point as the Bolsheviks, the party that they had viewed as their chance for peace, had betrayed them, and many groups were throwing their weight behind anyone who would appease the Central Powers. However, the following counter-revolution will see pure chaos. Continued German offensives would see them marching into an unpoliceable Petrograd, which is in full radicalism on every angle of the political spectrum. But Germany is making huge gains as the left Bolsheviks see their theory of revolution spawning in Europe as a failure. Germany would want to retain even more gained territory, with the exception of Petrograd, again, unpoliceable. And should any Russian government sign the peace treaty, they will face both peace, however a massive backlash for giving the Germans and losing a lot of land. So you see, there's really no winning as any Russian politician at this point. After Russia drops out of the war, they are still going to enter a civil war period. But instead of Bolsheviks, the majority of what would be considered the Red Army are extreme revolutionaries like the Kronstadt sailors and even more moderate Bolsheviks as well as Mensheviks. Meanwhile, the White Army is just furious at any government which supported the peace treaty, as well as the Bolsheviks and any member of the Red Army for creating the conditions for a peace agreement with the Central Powers, which gave away a lot of Russian land. The aftermath of dropping out of the war for Russia in this alternate timeline is of course a massive civil war and massive chaos, which would be even more chaotic and destructive than the one which occurred in our timeline, if you can believe that. And believe me, that was what actually happened and was already catastrophic enough. Furthermore, Germany owns even more territory to have to administer for a few months as independence movements are occurring everywhere in Eastern Europe, and the fate of Russia as well as Eastern Europe are completely unknown, depending on what else happens. The Western Front will not see a Kaiserschlacht, as even though Germany eventually gets a Russian surrender, it's a lot later and Germany had to leave more troops in the east to maintain control. But once all of those German troops arrive in the west, they're not going to launch a large offensive, perhaps in a few targeted areas, but I think that Germany will have to stay on the defensive as the war drags on until potentially 1919, as starvation takes hold and the Americans are arriving in the masses. This is of course just one possible scenario, but what do you think would have happened had the Bolsheviks remained at war with the Central Powers during World War I? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.